Welcome to the Shadow of Il Duce podcast, a podcast on change and legacies in Italy. I'm your host Diego, and in this episode we will discuss the social and cultural changes that occurred during the Italian economic miracle. The Italian countryside today is littered with abandoned properties. They sit, cordoned off, and slowly decaying under the sun. The landscape today is also marked by hundreds of miles of motorways, snaking through valleys and blasting through mountains. The fields that were full of workers now lie empty, replaced with a growl of machinery. The Italian economic miracle did not only change the economic fortunes of the country, it changed its very soul. Italy went from an agrarian society with urban centres to an urban society with large, empty expanses of countryside. Systems that had existed for centuries rotted away in less than a decade. The miracle had propelled Italy forwards faster than it ever had. It revolutionized rhythms and language and made sure that the Italy of the 60s was unrecognizable from the Italy of the 50s. The Italian identity was molded and changed as Italians dealt with their past and tried to move on from fascism. This is a story of a quest for a new Italy, a quest for rebirth, an Italy unmarked by fascist values and the memory of a brutal war. The miracle revolutionized how Italians saw themselves. It changed where they lived, how they saw their national identity, and how they believed they fitted in with Italy. To many, it was a time of progress and renewal. Italians were remade in ways that fascists can only dream of. Economic fortunes first of all shaped the destiny of the countryside. One of the biggest changes was that Italy went from an agrarian society to a largely industrialized and urban one. The main driver of this change was migration. Millions of people moved from fields to city and increasingly from south to north. Between 1953 and 1973, 9 million Italians were involved in interregional migration. The economic miracle needed workers and jobs were plentiful. The first ones to move were young single males, tempted by life in the cities. They were sick of the old rural way of life and flocked in droves to the promised lands. They started the migration chains, where one family member scouted out the local area, found work and accommodation, and then brought his whole family along. In the stations of Turin, Milan and Genoa, thousands poured onto the platforms, ready to start their new lives. In 1962, 100,000 southerners arrived in Milan. Turin grew by an extraordinary 42%. Italy first industrialized and urbanized at a breakneck speeds. Milan began to explode onto the local Lombard landscape. The government's response was trying to churn out as many housing developments as possible. Politicians struggled to rein in the new forces of the miracle, and any planning was ignored or overtaken by events. Corruption and speculation led to huge amounts of green space and countryside being buried under concrete. The economics miracle's first victim was the environment. By the 1970s, no major Italian cities could boast more than 3 square meters of green area per inhabitant. The rape of Palermo saw large tracts of hills and land buried under huge swaths of cement. Planning rules were adjusted to fit the needs and requirements of building entrepreneurs. Italian cities, renowned for their beauty and character, were forever changed by the relentless forces of modernization. Even in a country held back by legacies and tradition, nothing could stop the unstoppable. Only some cities succeeded in at least stemming the tide, such as Bologna, which managed to preserve its beautiful medieval city. Most northern towns were Americanized, and housing estates and shanty towns with dreadful conditions sprawled for miles on end. Urban outskirts suffocated ancient and artistic city centres, and air pollution, such as in Milan, became a major problem. Industrial expansion was just as unplanned as urban one, and sadly more deadly. Industrial centres sprung up in and around cities, pouring out huge amounts of pollution and scarring the landscapes. Porto Marghera, near Venice, covered and still covers 6 kilometres of the shore and over 2,000 hectares, and housed over 2,000 chimney stacks emitting over 240,000 tonnes of chemicals into the atmosphere. A yellowish pall began to form over the area, and over 1,200 workers were poisoned, scalded, or subjected to toxic exhalation between 1971 and 1973. The Taranto steelworks continued to dominate the city landscape, and in 2002 it produced over 30% of all Italian emissions. Italy had urbanized, and the cities grew, but at a huge cost. The development eventually cost lives. In the 1950s, a steep valley in the Friuli region in northeastern Italy was chosen for a site for a dam. The area was known as Vajont. Despite warnings of the area's geological instability, the dam still went ahead. The warnings were proved correct when, on the 9th of October 1963, a landslide caused a massive 250-meter tall wave which overtopped the dam and devastated the valley below, killing thousands of people. In 1976, a fire broke out at a local factory in the town of Seveso near Milan. A white cloud appeared over the horizon. This white cloud was dioxin, a deadly poison. Soon people began to feel ill and their skin began to go red. Animals began to die and panic broke out, but it took over a week for anything to happen. Workers still actually went to the factory, and only 2 weeks later was a general evacuation called. It was too late by then. Hundreds suffered from severe injuries, and the media was full of carabinieri in white suits and gas masks clearing fields of corpses of deformed animals. Change had come, but at a high price. However, the greatest effects of urbanization was not on the cities, but on the countryside. While the cities filled with people and cities grew completely out of control, the countryside depopulated. Rural towns were deserted, and only inhabited by the old and by the dead. The only flourishing industry soon became grave digging. With this, rural Italy soon began dying. Old system of land sharing died overnight. Sharecropping, a system where families worked the fields and shared their produce with the landowners, had existed for centuries, but soon began to wither away. Sharecropping no longer made sense for even the family of landowners. People abandoned the land, and their houses were abandoned or transformed into agro-tourist hotels. Once the local church was gone, a village ceased to exist. This happened especially in central Italy, where vast areas were left to rot, a powerful symbol of a past long gone. In Umbria, a region where sharecropping was dominant, 137,000 people left agricultural work. In 1951, 60% of Umbrians worked the land, but by 1981, this figure had fallen to a mere 9%. The land was there, and still cultivated, but the peasant sharecroppers and their homes disappeared. They were replaced largely by machines. In 1957, there were only 57,000 tractors in Italy, but by 1980, this figure had risen to over 1 million. The dream of a private home and a job in a factory soon replaced the myth of land ownership. This house would not be a working house, but a house filled with new furniture and objects to please guests. The traditional relationship with animals and their products was abandoned. Bread and cheese were no longer made, but purchased at the local Conad. The Italians themselves were being urbanized. Entire regions turned away from traditional forms of mixed production towards lucrative export-led goods such as wine and cheese. In the north, the hills of Piemonte and the rice fields of Lombardy, oxen were replaced by machinery, and the counterculture of the mondine or rice workers were only left alive through songs and popular memory. The new Italian that appeared was one tuned with the industrial landscape that they inhabited. Italians put on their blue overalls and discarded their peasants' clothes. They became the new industrial working class. Growing seasons soon lost their meaning as a new industrial rhythm was integrated into Italian life. Sirens meticulously planned the tempo of the working day. Workers would get a short cigarette on lunch break, go to the bar after work, arrive back home late and immediately go to bed. Next day the whole thing would start again. The rhythm of life is perfectly showcased in the first scene of the Italian comedy film Fantozzi. The film surrounds the life of a white-collar worker called Ugo Fantozzi, fed up with life and work. His entire life is built around getting to work on time. In the morning, he only has a few seconds to wake up, drink his wife's coffee, and relieve himself. Everything is planned to the literal second. However, this fateful morning, his shoelace snaps, making his plans completely obsolete. He has to jump out of the balcony, run after a bus, and arrives at work with just a few seconds to spare. Although it's a comedy film, Fantozzi and his shenanigans represent the industrial working day of many Italians, at least what they thought about it. A new industrial working class was being born. However, this class was quite wealthy. It could afford cars, fridges, washing machines, they could afford holidays with their family. The creation of an industrial working class also inevitably led to the increase in union strength, especially after 1962 and 1963, when the PSI, or the Socialists, were brought into the wide-ranging coalition. CGIL, the Communist Trade Union, gained over 5 million members, and by the late 60s, labour militancy was high. Factory work was tough and dangerous, and workers wanted what workers in other countries already had. They wanted an end to compulsory overtime, better sick pay, and a reduction in work hours. In what became known as the Hot Autumn in 1969, over 5.5 million workers, or 25% of the labour force, walked out. Factories were taken over and clashes with the police regularly occurred. In the 1970s, Statuto dei Lavoratori gave workers wide-ranging rights after a long drawn-out fight. Thus, Italy didn't only acquire a modern industrial working class, but also a modern trade union system that would represent them. Italy's social and urban structure had truly been transformed. Whilst the Italian cities grew, Another revolution was occurring within Italians' homes. The miracle was a time of huge profits and innovation, and this innovation soon found its way into Italian homes. The miracle ensured Italians actually received not only a livable wage, but a comfortable wage. Even the poorest peasants in the south began to be able to afford new goods. Thus, Italians spent, and they spent a lot. Italy became overnight a society of consumers, ready and willing to fill their homes with all types of goods. Everything from phones to toasters was bought in droves. Ignis, a home appliance firm, became one of the biggest fridge producers in Europe, pumping out over 8,000 fridges a day. This didn't only affect the kitchen of Italians, it also changed how they viewed themselves. Everything Italian gained a new sense of glamour. Hollywood glamour imported to Italy was redefined into the Italian context. It soon became a way to find a new identity and purpose in this turbulent world. A Dolce Vita, or the good life, became a way to reestablish Italians' image. Rome became a fashionable city, especially for foreigners. Italy was enticing and beautiful. Fellini's film La Dolce Vita captures this perfectly by presenting an era wrapped in a mythological aura. This myth soon became linked with material possessions. It became associated with Fiats, with Vespers, and with coffee machines. Adverts of the period all showed the glamorous style of Italian products, showcasing cars alongside famous actresses wearing Italian fashion. Italian prestige grew, but not as Mussolini had intended through conquest. Piaggio, which produced heavy bombers during World War II, swapped into producing the very famous Vespers, which they began to mass produce at ridiculous rates and which became embedded in Italian identity. Italians were being remade, and soon became a country in constant pursuit of development and modernizations. Italians became a nation of dreamers, daydreaming success stories in this new world. Consumerism soon became a way to modernize Italy. Backwards and undeveloped areas were lamented as national scandals. Matera, a city in Basilicata known for 15,000 people living in caves, became a symbol of backwardness and destitution. It was a source of national embarrassment and a quick injection of reality at a time when Italy was trying to move forwards. Modernization in post-war Italy was very similar to the fascist push for modernization. It put an emphasis on the modernization of customs and a country to create a common identity and consensus. In an effort to confront fascism's popular myths of the masses, citizenship was redefined in terms of domesticity. Life would become privatized, kitchens and living rooms replaced the piazza and the squares. Another key good or object that represented the privatization of life and modernization was the car. The car represented personal mobility and freedom, and it was often linked with the home. One of the first Fiat 600 adverts involves a scene of a Fiat 600 placed in front of a modern house surrounded by a young family. Cars represented the link between domesticity and mobility, allowed the family unit the freedom to travel wherever they wanted. Another advert for the Fiat 500 showcased a lone employee meeting his family outside a factory, whilst workers with bikes followed him out at a distance. The car was a symbol of modernization that would lead Italians to new places and free them from the past. These cars were fueled with the Supercorte Maggiore from Eni, with its aggressive, modern logo, both symbols of Italian ingenuity and modernity. Italians soon fell in love with cars. Fiat created many cheap cars that many Italians could afford. By 1970s, there were over 10 million cars. The Fiat cars were utilitarian. They were durable, beautiful, and aimed at the family unit across the classes. Cars soon became to dominate Italian cities. Naples' Piazza Plebiscito became a car park. Ring roads suffocated cities such as Rome and Milan, whilst they also burst through mountains. Fiat became ingrained into Italian life. It wasn't just a business, but a way of life. It created cars for the people, and due to its immense power, shaped the lives of its workers and Turin, where the firm was based. What is good for Fiat became good for Italy. Like any, Fiat defined Cold War logic and built a plant in Russia, and became a political and powerhouse. Cars, however, also represented Italians reclaiming symbols of identity from the fascist era. The Fiat 500, or the Topolino, was actually born in the 1930s after a fascist push for a people's car. The Fiat 500 soon became cemented into Italians' identity. Ferrari also found its roots under fascism. Enzo Ferrari ran the Scudiera Ferrari team, whose coat of arms was the prancing horse of Francesco Baracca, the top-flying Italian ace during World War I. It became a propaganda symbol for the regime. Fast Italian cars emblazoned with a symbol representing war and glory beat world records and won races. Post-war, the Scudetto Ferrari went from signifying war and the fascist new man to representing glamour and Italian artistic talent. However, there is another very important tool of modernization, and that's the TV. The TV became the educator of the nation and united Italians together into one culture. In 1954, there were only 24,000 license holders, and by 1970s, there were over 10 million. It depicted modern ways of life, such as the tolerant family man or the hygienic housewife. It spread secular values and injected Italian households with a national culture. Shows such as Lascia or Raddoppia, Double or Quits, where ordinary people could win life-changing prizes, captivated a nation dreaming of upward mobility. TV grew alongside a strong national identification of Italians and became embedded with it. TV also spread another important activity, sport. Italy is one of the few countries in the world to have 3 daily newspapers all devoted to sport. Sport became another adhesive glue for Italians. The dream of millions of Italians came true when the national football team led by Paolo Rossi won the 1982 World Cup. Football and sport at large became very important for the clientelistic network. The PSI Minister of Foreign Affairs was the president of the Basketball League, whilst Enzo Scotti, the Minister of the Interior, was the president for the Cycling Association. Sport allowed Italy to reintegrate into the international scene and show off the new reborn Italian. The 1960s Olympics in Rome, 50 years after the end of the war, represented a new Italy taking its first confident steps onto the international stage. It was a triumph, as Italian athletes won 36 medals, including 13 gold medals, and came third in the medal tables. Italy had seemingly reborn into a new nation through the forces of the miracle. Italy and Italians were desperately trying to move forwards on from its fascist past, clutching at anything that could be added to the new post-war identity. However, the most interesting aspect of this new Italian identity is food. Italians are known for one thing, and that's food. The passion for food and everything related to food is often seen as an Italian trait by many. Food and cuisine formed an integral part of the Italian post-war identity. As Eric Hobsbawm argues, when a community finds itself deprived of its sense of identity because of an ahistorical shock or fracture, it invents traditions that act as founding myths. Food soon became this. As Italy saw the same kind of progress that other nations witnessed over half a century, Italians quickly began to afford things they would never imagine they could enjoy a decade ago. The days of bread rationing were over, and a new identity needed to be created as Italians moved on from their troubled past. This is best shown by the Italian dish known as carbonara. The myth is that the dish was eaten by charcoal workers of the 18th century. Yet the carbonara was a dish popularized in the post-war era where eggs, cream and ham were made abundant. Most Romans ate bean soup, and meat was very, very rare and only eaten once a year. The Italian integration of food into their identity helped Italians believe that there was something else about Italianness than just the legacies of fascism. They could point out a supposed legacy of their cuisine as something that wasn't tainted by fascism, something that's truly Italian that had existed for centuries before. It was comforting for a broken people to believe in some supposedly long-held traditions and feel like they were part of something rather than a defeated and broken people. It unified Italians. It could become something that was spoken of in the same way the English complain about the weather. In fact, eating food in Italy is often linked with unity. Family meals are meant to be enjoyed together at the table where the day and national affairs are discussed. There is a word for this in Italian, which is la tavola. While il tavolo means table as an object, la tavola is untranslatable. It describes the entire meal, its preparation, the experiences of being with family. Food culture also interestingly is a great symbol to represent the conservatism and love for continuity in Italian life. Dishes that had only been born in the post-war era became fiercely defended as long-held traditions, largely to protect a new identity and prevent old wounds from being opened again. Italian food culture is famously inflexible. Tagliatelle have to be 7 millimeters wide, and there are over 800 protected designations. Gnocchi in Rome are served on Thursdays, and carbonara must have only 4 ingredients: guanciale, pecorino, eggs and pepper. Any deviations can become national news. Like everything in Italy, this deep and dogmatic attachment to food soon became exploited by politicians, especially in recent years. Gastropopulism soon came to dominate the Italian political discourse, and is used extensively by right-wing anti-immigration parties. Salvini famously said, "Sì alla polenta, no al couscous." Yes to polenta, no to the couscous. La Lega pushed heavily for the elimination of foreign foods from Italian city centres, and Meloni's Minister of Agriculture suggested establishing a task force to monitor Italian restaurants around the world. Fast food presents perfectly the conservatism that grips day-to-day Italian life. Despite all the rapid changes during the miracle, a key aspect of Italians lives on: their conservatism and their love for tradition. The miracle was a period of remarkable change. It turned Italy upside down at remarkable speeds and made sure Italy was never the same. Yet, this was not without opposition. The modernization drives clashed with the sense of continuity that many Italians treasured. Whilst the state and the political classes were pushing forwards, others pushed backwards. Italians had learned the tough way what happens if they embraced and endorsed abrupt change. Mussolini and fascism had discredited rapid change and produced a backlash against decisiveness. Italians made the conscious decision to disperse power as much as possible. As talked about in earlier episodes, this helped create an infinite check of balances and checks that effectively stunted any dramatic change. The DC dominated politics until the 1980s, and through their clientelistic networks created a nation adverse to change. On the 20th of May 1999, Massimo Antona, a lecturer on employment law, was shot dead by members of a left-wing terrorist organization. His crimes? Trying to reform the Italian labor market. Italy is a country where you can be murdered for trying to liberalize a labor market. Many other countries have done so without assassinations. The desire for continuity and safety is what compelled these murders. However, tradition and continuity was not only limited to politics. Despite welcoming many consumer goods, Italians remained largely technophobic. Many Italians refused to use a dishwasher. 70% of American homes have it, whilst only 31% of Italian homes do. Whilst this may be due to different incomes, 1/5 of Italians said that they would return a dishwasher if it was given as a gift. Italians are also very slow to take on the internet. By the mid-2000s, more than half of Italian homes were without a computer, and only a third of those were actually connected to the internet. The TV was derided as a destroyer of families and communities once it became popular, and many lamented how the beautiful Italian countryside was being swept away under tarmac and tires. Despite the rapid changes that had transformed an agrarian society into a generally wealthy industrial one, the miracle did not change the Italians' attachment to continuity. Glamour and la Dolce Vita resounded with foreigners, but not with the southern factory worker living in the north, or the elderly led to rot in the abandoned villages. The miracle brought change to a country known for its hate of that very word. Fascism had failed to change Italians and their fortunes, but the miracle succeeded in large parts. Rural Italy was vanquished, and an urban Italy grew out of the ashes. An industrial working class appeared who could afford all sorts of modern goods and protect their rights. Italy was modernizing and had gained all the criteria necessary to be named as a modern nation. Its citizens dreamed of social mobility and the beautiful life. Life was booming, and so was the country. The Italy of the 60s was unrecognizable from the Italy that had emerged from the war. A new Italian was born. Yet this was not an easy process. The forces of continuity and tradition were very much present and are still present. While some were chasing dreams of advancement, others preserved the safety of continuity. The miracle may have made a new breed of Italians, but it didn't exactly unify them. The divisions would become very clear as Italy descended once more into violence.